The beating heart of the Beatles, Ringo Starr, is not just a gifted drummer, but also a representation of humor and simplicity in a society where the demands of celebrity weigh heavily. Ringo's journey from a sickly, fragile youngster growing up in Liverpool to performing on the world's biggest stages is proof of the strength of perseverance and devotion. He was the band's unifying factor throughout his career, a dependable companion in the face of strife and chaos. However, there were unknown truths hidden behind the stage lights and iconic classics. Ringo, who has been silent for decades, has finally revealed a startling information at the age of 84. It's possible that Yoko Ono was far more involved with the Beatles than we realized. Is this the last piece needed to solve the riddle surrounding the breakup of the most famous band in history? Let's travel back in time and examine Ringo Starr's transformation from a regular kid to a world-renowned musician, to see what he has to say about Yoko Ono's role in the Beatles' demise and early years. Born on July 7, 1940, in Liverpool's working-class neighborhood of Dingle, Richard Starkey, better known to the world as Ringo Starr, was born. Ringo's early years may have seemed destined for happiness because he was born into a family that valued dance and music, but what transpired was anything but idyllic. At one point, his parents, Richard Starkey Sr. and Elsie Glee, had embraced a lively social life that included ballroom dancing and swing music. But with the birth of little Richie, everything changed. There was a significant change in the family dynamic. While his father, Big Richie, gradually drifted away, spending less time with his family and more time in pubs, Elsie grew intensely protective of her kid. They separated, and then divorced in 1944 as a result of their rapidly falling apart life. Ringo suffered through a series of adversities, beginning with a near-death experience when he was just 6 years old, and was left with only fragmentary recollections of his father. He developed peritonitis as a result of complications after what should have been a simple appendectomy. He was hospitalized for a whole year throughout his recuperation, which caused him to become estranged from his family and lag behind academically. By the time he got back home, Ringo was having trouble in school, feeling isolated from his friends, and battling his own fears. However, something unexpected occurred right when it appeared that life had given him yet another brutal blow. Ringo originally developed a love for drumming during this protracted hospital stay, pounding away on anything he could find. Despite being a tiny spark, it would eventually grow into a lifelong obsession. The medical personnel encouraged the kids to perform music in an effort to keep them entertained, and Ringo took advantage of the chance, tapping out beats with homemade drumsticks that would eventually serve as his getaway from the harsh realities of his early years. Unfortunately, he had to return to long-term care for 2 years in 1953 after contracting TB. Once more, Ringo turned to music for comfort, losing himself in the sound of drums while he was uninterested in other instruments. Although he had a difficult path, the fortitude he cultivated throughout these years would prove to be a distinguishing characteristic of the man who would go on to rule the world with the Beatles. By the time he got home, Ringo had forgotten about school and had no desire to go back. Instead, he enjoyed pounding on biscuit tins with sticks and dancing to music as his mother remarried and attempted to start again. In sharp contrast to the environment around him, Ringo learned kindness from his stepfather, Harry Graves, who also introduced him to the world of big band music. Ringo lived in a depressing neighborhood that was rife with crime and small, dilapidated houses. You have to keep your head down and try to survive there. However, despite these challenging circumstances, Ringo's love for music simply became stronger. Even though he had trouble keeping a job, whether it was as a server or a railway worker, his passion for rhythm remained constant. The music culture that started to emerge around him captivated his attention more than the machinery when he eventually secured an apprenticeship as a machinist. Ringo's destiny was gradually being written during these modest times. A young man discovering skiffle music and making lifelong companions, from a sickly toddler tapping on hospital cabinets. A number of hardships in Ringo's early years equipped him for something much bigger than he could have ever dreamed. Nobody could have predicted that one day, one beat at a time, this youngster from the gritty alleys of Liverpool would transform the world. However, what impact did these early struggles have on the guy who would become the Beatles' drummer? Watch as we reveal the many facets that contributed to Ringo's remarkable rise to fame. Early career. To indulge in their love of music, Ringo Starr and his friend Roy Trafford would sneak down to a little club called the Cellar during their lunch periods at the manufacturing plant. Ringo improvised, using everything he could find, such as a box, a biscuit tin, or even the back of a chair, to create rhythms while Trafford strummed his guitar. Soon after, guitarist Eddie Miles, a neighbor and co-worker, joined their improvised band, and the two of them established the Eddie Miles Band. Later, the group changed their name to Eddie Clayton and the Clayton Squares in honor of a well-known monument in Liverpool. Playing upbeat songs like Rock Island Line and Walking Cane, the band experimented with the popular skiffle craze. Always creative, Ringo added a straightforward yet catchy beat by scraping a washboard with a thimble. Like his parents, he was naturally drawn to dancing, and he and Roy even took dance classes to hone their skills for social gatherings. On Christmas Day 1957, however, Ringo's stepfather, Harry Graves, gave him his first drum kit, a used set that included a bass drum, snare drum, and a homemade cymbal made out of a garbage can lid. This was the real game changer. Even though it was simple, it was all Ringo needed to begin learning how to play the drums. The Eddie Clayton Band got more concerts throughout Liverpool as a result of his improved performances. However, the skiffle wave was quickly waning as American rock and roll started to take over the UK. A crucial choice was taken by Ringo in November 1959. In an attempt to move from skiffle to full-fledged rock and roll, he joined Al Caldwell's Texans. The band tried a number of names, including the Raging Texans, Jetstorm, and the Raging Texans, before deciding on Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. Inspired by the rings he wore, and desiring a stage name with a country western flair, Richard Starkey formally changed his name to Ringo Starr about this time. By early 1960, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes had risen to prominence as one of Liverpool's most popular bands, and Ringo's solo performances, known as Star Time, had become a staple of the Hurricanes' repertoire. When they were offered a 3-month stay at a Butlins vacation camp in Wales in May of that year, it was their big break. At first, Ringo was conflicted because taking the job would require him to abandon his almost 5-year machinist apprenticeship. Ringo, however, did what he felt, and that decision would permanently alter his existence. Greater chances, such as a visit to U.S. Air Force sites in France, were made possible by the Butlins residency. Ringo subsequently acknowledged that, despite the thrilling events, the tour wasn't as fun as he had imagined because of the tense environment caused by French-British tensions. They were so elated that they first turned down a chance to play in Hamburg, Germany, because of their Butlins promise. However, they then changed their minds, which resulted in a tragic turn of events. Rory Storm and the Hurricanes performed with the Beatles at Bruno Koschmider's Kaiser Keller Club in Hamburg on October 1, 1960. The Beatles, who were still largely unknown, opened for the Hurricanes, who were the main attraction. Ringo met John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison during this period. On October 15, 1960, Ringo made his debut appearance with the Beatles, playing drums on a recording of Summertime with Rory's lead singer Lou Walters. Ringo left an impression with his drumming. In addition to performing with the Beatles on occasion while they were in Hamburg, he also attracted the attention of guitarist Tony Sheridan. Sheridan was so taken with Ringo's distinct technique that he even made an attempt to entice him to leave the Hurricanes and join his own band. Nobody realized at the time that Ringo Starr's adventure with the Beatles had only just begun, and that history was about to undergo a permanent shift in rhythm. Joining the Beatles, Ringo Starr's choice to leave Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, a band that had given him some notoriety but left him wanting more, was a life-altering one. In January 1962, Ringo rejoined the Hurricanes for his final season at Butlins, after playing with Tony Sheridan for a short time in Hamburg. But on August 14, when he got the fateful call to join the Beatles from none other than John Lennon, everything changed. 2 days later, Pete Best, the band's drummer at the time, received the heartbreaking news from Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles. "The boys want Ringo in and you out." Best remembered hearing that George Martin, the producer, wasn't pleased with his drumming, because he just didn't fit in with the band. Although it was a severe blow, Ringo was prepared to assume the position that would permanently alter his course in life. On August 18, 1962, Ringo performed with the Beatles for the first time at a dance in Port Sunlight, but things weren't always easy. Pete Best's irate followers demonstrated the very following day at the storied Cavern Club, yelling, "Pete forever, Ringo never," both in Best's residence and outside the arena. The outcry was so strong that a vengeful fan punched George Harrison, and Epstein had to employ a bodyguard to keep Ringo safe. Ringo's fate was predetermined despite this difficult beginning. He had joined the Fab Four. Things didn't go as planned during Ringo's first recording session with the Beatles on September 4, 1962. Because of his doubts about Ringo's abilities, producer George Martin famously brought in session drummer Andy White to play on their debut single, "Love Me Do," during their next session on September 11. There were concerns that Ringo's tenure with the Beatles might not last long when he was reduced to playing the tambourine. Ringo subsequently said, "I thought that was the end." Martin quickly explained that it was just a precaution, but I initially feared they were pulling a Pete Best on me. Additionally, Ringo was completely accepted as one of the Beatles' own by November 1962. His faith in the band skyrocketed as some even demanded that he sing. Ringo soon transcended his role as the drummer for the Beatles. In and of himself, he was a cherished figure. During their legendary performances, his contagious energy and upbeat demeanor won over admirers all across the United Kingdom. "Please Please Me," the band's second single, shot to the top of the charts in 1963, sparking the Beatlemania that erupted throughout Britain. They became the biggest band in the nation after their pivotal televised debut on Thank Your Lucky Stars. With his signature charm, Ringo quickly gained popularity. Soon fans were sporting "I Love Ringo" lapel pins, and songs like "I Want to Kiss Ringo Goodbye" and "Ringo for President" were playing non-stop. Ringo relished the party lifestyle that came with stardom as the Beatles' popularity skyrocketed and he got his fair share of attention. He remembered with fondness how his dance abilities, which were frequently lauded, contributed to his magnetic allure. And Ringo's celebrity power was evident when the Beatles traveled across the Atlantic to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show in February 1964. He won over the hearts of Americans with 73 million viewers. Later Ringo remarked, "I knew I went over well in the States. I couldn't believe how many children were waving at me. We were just regular guys, but we had succeeded." Ringo's fame was growing, especially after John Lennon put a microphone in front of his drum equipment during his star time highlight periods during performances, causing the audience to applaud. He stood out in the Beatles' debut movie, A Hard Day's Night, thanks to his deadpan wit and innate charm. Both critics and fans commended the passages that director Richard Lester created to showcase Ringo's expressive abilities. In actuality, Ringo was still recuperating from a night of drinking when some of his most famous moments were captured on camera. However, the audience just grew to love him more because of his quaintness, as Epstein described it. There were conflicts and difficulties in spite of the incredible achievement. During the Beatles' 1964 World Tour preparations, Ringo missed 5 shows due to a severe case of tonsillitis and pharyngitis. When session drummer Jimmy Nicole briefly replaced him, he feared the worst, that he would be permanently replaced. Fortunately, Ringo returned to the band in Melbourne, but Beatlemania was starting to get to all of them. Ringo even had a terrifying death threat prior to a performance in Montreal, which made him set his cymbals upright for protection while performing. Ringo got his first taste of lead vocals on a British #1 single when the Beatles released Revolver in 1966, which included the hit song Yellow Submarine, amid the turmoil. However, the band had grown tired of the constant touring schedule by the end of that year. After giving it some thought, Ringo decided to stop touring. For anyone, 4 years of Beatlemania was enough. Soon after, he relocated to Sunny Heights, a larger mansion, and concentrated on drumming for Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band's seminal album Sgt. Despite its popularity, Ringo acknowledged that at times he felt like little more than a session musician, as McCartney and Lennon gained more authority over the creative process. In 1968, As the White Album was being recorded, Ringo briefly left the Beatles due to simmering internal conflicts. Ringo withdrew to Sardinia, where he sought comfort and composed Octopus's Garden, after being frustrated with McCartney's domineering actions and the passive aggressiveness between Lennon and Harrison. Harrison greeted him warmly upon his return 2 weeks later, bringing flowers and his drum gear as a peace sacrifice. However, the fissures were already visible, and the Beatles' days were doomed due to the problematic Let It Be sessions in 1969. The Beatles made their final recording together at Abbey Road Studios on August 20, 1969. Lennon made his resignation known in private a few weeks later, and McCartney formally confirmed it on April 10, 1970. The Beatles had vanished. However, what would happen to Ringo Starr if the biggest band breakup in history occurred? Watch this space to learn how he handled life outside of the Beatles. The prosperous solo career of Ringo. Ringo Starr demonstrated that he was much more than simply the Beatles' drummer when he left the drum kit to pursue an amazing solo career following the band's dissolution. Starr quickly established himself on the charts with the catchy hit song It Don't Come Easy from 1971, which demonstrated his independence. This achievement was only the start. The heartfelt Photograph, which he co-wrote with George Harrison, and the light-hearted You're 16, which he went on to record 2 number-1 singles in the United States, further solidified his status as a prominent solo artist. Back Off Boogaloo rose to number 2 in the UK, turning into one of his best-selling solo albums in his native country. Ringo Starr's solo album was a huge hit by 1973 and made it to the top 10 in both the US and the UK. It was a significant accomplishment that demonstrated Starr's ability to succeed without the Beatles' shadow. His former bandmates contributed to the album, which helped to further connect his musical journey from the past to the present. However, Ringo was much more than just a musician. He became well known on TV, appearing in many documentaries, and even hosting programs. His warm, unique voice became legendary for a whole new generation of fans when he narrated the first 2 seasons of the children's show Thomas and Friends, one of his most cherished roles. Additionally, he played Mr. Conductor on the PBS children's program, Shining Time Station, where his warmth and sense of humor once again delighted younger viewers. Ringo maintained a strong connection to his live performing beginnings even as his popularity as a solo artist increased. He formed Ringo Starr and his all-star band in 1989, assembling a revolving cast of talented musicians to accompany him on his global tour. His all-star band swiftly gained popularity among fans due to its energetic performances that featured a variety of Ringo's solo singles, Beatles classics, and bandmate songs. The idea was straightforward but fantastic. The band put on a presentation that was both joyous and collaborative, with each member getting their turn on stage. In addition to his financial success, Starr was well known and admired for his drumming technique. Ringo placed a higher value on feel, groove and musicality than many drummers who were more concerned with technical accuracy. He played for the tune, not for showy solos, and his understated yet inventive style inspired many drummers to approach their work with more consideration and creativity. His use of the matched grip, lower drum tuning, and tonal ring muffling are some of the techniques that have come to define modern drumming. As evidence of his talent and sensitivity behind the kit, Starr frequently cited his effort on the Beatles' song Rain as his best recorded drumming. Ringo's musical talents were not overlooked. Although he frequently minimized his own skills, he was inducted into the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame in 1999, and was named the 6th greatest drummer of all time by Rolling Stone readers in 2011. Most notably, Starr became one of the select few musicians to get 2 inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He established himself as a genuinely legendary character in music history. In 1988, as a member of the Beatles, and in 2015 as a solo performer. After decades of outstanding accomplishments, Starr was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2018 and became Sir Richard Starkey for his services to music. Ringo maintained his modesty throughout his lengthy career, frequently stating that he felt fortunate to have been a part of such a significant musical journey. However, His impact, charisma, and skill are indisputable, and his legacy in music history is certain. But what was Ringo Starr's life like outside of the studio and stage? How did this iconic performer handle the highs and lows of stardom? As we delve into the intimate aspects of Ringo's remarkable life, stay tuned, Private Life. Just as fascinating as Ringo Starr's path to stardom is his personal life. In 1962, the week he joined the Beatles, he met hairdresser Maureen Cox. After a brief courtship, they were married in February 1965, with George Harrison and the star's stepfather Harry Graves as witnesses and Beatles manager Brian Epstein as the best man. The public's excitement with the marriage was captured by the Chiclets' novelty song, Treat Him Tender, Maureen, which was inspired by the wedding. Zach, born on September 13, 1965, Jason, born on August 19, 1967, and Lee, born on November 11, 1965, 1970 were Ringo and Maureen's 3 children together. When Starr bought John Lennon's Berkshire house Tittenhurst Park in 1971, he moved his family into the expansive mansion. However, Ringo and Maureen's marriage was difficult, and they separated in 1975 as a result of persistent infidelity. Sadly, Maureen died of leukemia in 1994 when she was just 48 years old. On the set of Caveman in 1980, Ringo and actress Barbara Bach met by chance, and their passion blossomed until their marriage on April 27, 1981, in Marylebone Town Hall. Together they created a glamorous yet private lifestyle, dividing their time between their residences in Monte Carlo, Los Angeles and Cranley, Surrey. Ringo became the first Beatle to become a grandfather in 1985, with the birth of Tatia Jane Starkey, Zach's daughter. Zach became a gifted drummer, carrying on his father's legacy. He played with artists like The Who, and even joined his father on stage on all-star band tours. In 2016, Ringo became the first great-grandfather in Beatles history, adding to his already impressive legacy of 8 grandchildren. Ringo has always led a modest life in spite of his celebrity and fortune. With an estimated net worth of £150 million, he was ranked number 56 on the Sunday Times Rich List in 2011. By 2012, he was acknowledged as the world's richest drummer. Although Ringo retained houses in Chelsea, London and Los Angeles, he listed his expansive 200-acre Surrey estate, Ridinghurst, for sale in 2014. A year later, he and Bach put together an amazing collection of personal belongings, which included a highly sought-after original pressing of the White Record with the number 00001, and Starr's first Ludwig drum kit. Over $9 million was raised at the auction, and the couple's charity, the Lotus Foundation, benefited from some of the sales. Ringo's opinions on contemporary affairs have also garnered media attention. He called Brexit a brilliant idea, and backed the UK's vote to leave the European Union in 2016, but he later bemoaned its sluggish progress. In 2017, he publicly called on Britain to assume leadership and proceed with the process. Starr's name surfaced in the 2021 Pandora Papers, a global investigation that exposed the clandestine financial transactions of politicians and celebrities who used tax havens to conceal their wealth. Ringo maintains a tranquil, health-conscious lifestyle away from the limelight. According to Mary McCartney, he has been a vegetarian for years, and is known to avoid onions and garlic because of allergies. His life revolves around his now famous mantra, peace and love, and he meditates every day. At the age of 84, Ringo Starr is making headlines once more, this time for a shocking admission that may alter our perceptions of the Beatles. What has Ringo revealed throughout the years? To find out, stay with us. Following decades of silence, Ringo has admitted that Yoko Ono was much more responsible for the band's breakup than was previously thought. Ringo asserts that Yoko's impact on John Lennon was not merely personal, rather it had a significant impact on the band's dynamic. Her frequent visits to the studio, and her influence over Lennon's artistic choices, produced a tense and polarizing atmosphere that pushed the Beatles' already damaged relationships to the brink. Ringo remembers the White Album recording sessions as a significant turning point. As Yoko remained at Lennon's side, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo himself became increasingly irritated. With John and Yoko on one side and the rest of the band feeling more and more cut off, what had once been a cohesive, cooperative group was now divided. According to Ringo, the environment was poisonous, as disputes over art devolved into personal disputes and animosity festered beneath the surface. Yoko's influence appeared to be the decisive factor in the breakdown of the trust and friendship that had underpinned their creative achievement. The personal toll that these difficulties placed on Ringo is further shown by his frank remarks. Ringo had a brief but major break from the band during the White Album sessions as a result of feeling marginalized and undervalued as the band disintegrated. He describes how the strain got to be too much, and his emotional withdrawal was an obvious indication of the Beatles' internal conflict. He was eventually persuaded to rejoin by Lennon, but the band's cohesiveness was too severely damaged to be completely restored. Ringo's admission of the emotional toll this time period took on him is arguably the most tragic aspect of his confession. Ringo witnessed the Beatles, who were once inseparable, grow increasingly distant, as he watched the intimate bonds he held dear disintegrate in real time. He spoke melancholy on how internal conflict, made worse by Yoko's influence over John, wrecked the group's once famous chemistry. The Beatles evolved from the legendary band that had taken the world by storm to more of a collection of individuals as each member started pursuing their own interests. Ringo's disclosures, however, go beyond Yoko's part in the Beatles' demise. He also considers his personal hardships during this turbulent period, especially his fight with alcoholism, which coincided with the band's breakup. His life descended into disarray as a result of his personal struggles, the demands of celebrity, and the dissolution of the Beatles. But despite everything, Ringo managed to get sober, displaying incredible fortitude and resiliency in the face of hardship. The story of the Beatles' dissolution is told from a fresh, intensely personal angle thanks to Ringo's confession. Although Ringo's testimony also highlights the emotional wounds caused by this tumultuous time, Yoko Ono's long-speculated role is now proven as a crucial element in the band's disintegration. For Ringo, this marked the end of a fraternity, as much as the band. As he considers what was lost, both musically and personally, his thoughts on the last few years of the Beatles are tinged with both sadness and longing. We wonder if another Beatles member will come forward to offer their own viewpoint as Ringo shares his version of events. Could previous interviews with George Harrison or Paul McCartney provide additional context for the band's internal conflicts? The whole image may still be incomplete because there are so many unreported tales about the Beatles' split. Keep checking back as we explore the viewpoints of the band's closest associates in greater detail and reveal the true events that transpired behind the scenes over those last few days.